everyone, and welcome to today's National Soil Survey Center webinar. My name is Sean McVeigh, National Training Coordinator for the Soil Science Division and host for today's webinar, From VNIR to R, Scanning Soils to Rapidly Predict a World of Soil Attributes. This webinar is being recorded, and all participants join the webinar in listen-only mode. You receive the webinar audio through your device speakers. There's no telephone dial-in. If you are having audio difficulties, please check the various ways your computer speakers may be muted or have their volume set low, including the speaker adjustments available in the Adobe Connect interface. You can maximize your webinar experience in Adobe Connect by shutting down VPNs and any other programs that might compete for bandwidth. This includes email and Microsoft Outlook and instant messaging in Link. Please take a look at our webinar room layout. We have content pods that allow you to download handouts, ask questions, and of course view the webinar presentation. Please use the 4-arrow icon in the featured presentation pod that allows you to enter and exit the full screen view as you choose. To submit a comment or question for me or our presenter, use the Q&A pod and type in your question. We'll handle technical difficulties the best we can while hosting the webinar and interact with our presenter to ask your questions during verbal Q&A periods. I want to thank Sky Wills for introducing me to Dr. Schmidt at the University of Georgia and the chance to partner with him to offer this webinar through our National Soil Survey Center webinar series. Sky, I'm going to turn the webinar over to you so you can introduce the topic and our presenter.
All right. Thank you, John Paul, or J.P. Schmidt, for providing us with this webinar today on VNIR and R, Scanning Soils to Rapidly Predict the World of Soil Attributes. So JP had a CESU agreement through the National Soil Survey and Kellogg Soil Survey Lab in order to make good use of all the VNIR scans we have from the lab and from the Rapid Carbon Project. So JP's background is a bachelor's in philosophy from Emory. That sounds pretty interesting. I'll have to ask about that sometime. But also plant biology and ecology from the University of Georgia. And some of his specific research projects that we as soil scientists might find interesting are in GIS and bioeconomic modeling, including machine learning tools. And some of that was on invasive species, which are pretty interesting. And he is now really interested in large, spatially explicit data sets, and that is something we sure have a lot of. So I really look forward to hearing what he's been able to do with it all. So take it away, JP. Thanks.
Well, thanks for that introduction. And I feel like at this point I need to put in a few caveats. As I started to put this all together, the kinds of things we're doing and present the project as it developed, I thought, you know, talking to local NRCS people and about what they're interested in doing DSPs. So I thought I'd start with doing just a little bit of spatial statistical modeling and just some of the nice features that exist in R, and then move, and I really touch on VNIR at the end. And so what I want to say is that I would like to follow up on this webinar with a subsequent webinar that maybe goes more deeply into VNIR calibration. But so I'd love to take your feedback on how useful this is, and then how it could really be advanced into a follow-up webinar. So the data we compiled has come from various sources, a lot of them NRCS, a lot of them local sources, local resources, researchers. And what we've been then compiling is soil data on the longleaf pine region, which is the region of southern Georgia, sandy coastal plain. And we were interested in what are soil attributes across land use trajectories. So we tried to get as much data as we could on a variety of land uses, and I'm going to show you subsets of that data to sort of give you an idea of how you might analyze and how you might come up with DSPs. So first we just read in the data, which sometimes can be quite a hassle in R, but that was not a problem here. So what I wanted to, so I have a lot of soil data. We have a lot of soil data. Some of it has scanned values, so it has spectra, but it doesn't have corresponding carbon values. So the first thing I'm doing is just selecting the data that is not vacant for carbon. And then I do a logit transformation. That's probably the easiest and best transformation to do on a proportional value. And then the next thing that I had to deal with was all the variety of depth measurements. So they're horizons, and I could try to aggregate by horizon, and that may be something some of you are interested in. What I chose to do in this case, since there were a lot of overlapping depths, and I thought a simple approach was simply to take the top and bottom depth and average it, find a middle depth, and log that. And I do this partly because I'm going to treat depth as a factor variable for what I'm trying to show. So I'm trying to show, rather than have a continuous depth, I'm trying to show means for various depth classes in terms of carbon. And so I hope you'll think this is a useful approach, at least to go through some of the processes that I want to take you through. I'm trying to move this arrow. Anyway, so one of the things that we also need to do is we need to recognize that this data is not, in the classical statistical sense, independent. Rather, it's spatially autocorrelated. So one of the things I needed to do was create unique sites from the data. Some of that existed, some of it didn't. So what I did is use the lat-long coordinates to find unique sites, and then I created a unique site ID. And then so I put that all together to create a data set that had these unique sites. It had the logit of percent total carbon and depth. And so what I wanted to do was take a subset of this soil series that we had, for which we had a fair amount of data, and it covered a variety of land use types, and those were the Pelham and the Tifton series. So for each of those, I wanted to find, what is the distribution of land use types that we had. So I wanted to show just some of the nice plotting methods in R. Basically, I got the unique number of profiles, and then I found the land use for those profiles. And so if you look here, we have a huge amount of data on row crop, and so we have a very good handle maybe on variation in soil carbon, in this case, for row crop. We have a fair amount of data on pine plantations and some of the swamp, floodplain forests. We have very little of these others. So this fallow is actually a single profile, and this marsh is several profiles. So we have very little data. And so those are almost extraneous data points in terms of capturing variation by community type. So I actually subset the data further just to concentrate on what are these major types we have. I might have gone with forest, but I decided to go with row crop, pine plantation, and floodplain. So the first thing I thought is let's just do a linear regression and see how we do on predicting carbon by using just the factor of land use. And we get an astounding 82%. But that's probably quite inflated, and it's inflated because so far we haven't taken into account any kind of spatial autocorrelation. And so one of the things that land use is capturing is just very similar sites, or sites that happen to be very close to each other and may be similar in many other ways. But what I wanted to show is that even a simple analysis like this you can use to generate, using the LS means package, a picture of how these land uses differ. So this is just based on that linear regression. This is a graph showing the three land use classes with soil depth. You can see it's really messy with this kind of up and down. You generally you do at some point see where soil carbon decreases down the profile, but there's quite a bit of play in these shallow depths. But we do see a difference. We have pine plantation has the highest, then floodplain, and then row crop. That row crop is the lowest. Is not surprising. That I would have expected floodplain to be higher, but remember we're dealing with rather small amounts of data. Okay, and so I wanted to also plot by land use type and soil depth. How do I get this one to? So I wanted to create a graph that shows. I'm having a little trouble here with. So I wanted to show a graph that showed confidence intervals for each of these land use classes for each of these depths. And I think this is a really useful kind of figure for comparing land uses and looking at soil, dynamic soil properties. And so I'll take that away and continue. So we've done just a very simple linear model, and we know that's obviously not taking care of a lot of spatial autocorrelation. So I'm curious how many people are familiar with mixed models and use them regularly, one or the other. I'm just curious if, I guess people can respond in the Q&A.
Or just put it into the chat. We could see it there. So just put in your answers in the chat.
Okay, where's the chat?
You'd have to make your screen smaller to see that, I think, but people have it available on their computer there.
Is that where it says Q&A?
There's a chat window above that, actually.
Okay. Chat window. I'm not making it out, but.
So Sky has offered that there's not a ton of people in the agency using these kind of models.
Okay, so I understand that few people are using mixed models. So I want to introduce you just to a very simple kind of mixed modeling approach. So the idea of mixed modeling is that we have fixed effects that we're interested in, like for instance land use, but we have random effects that are the result of repeated measures. If we're repeatedly measuring at the same site, if we have horizons within the same profile, then those aren't independent in the way that classical statistical models would like us to have independent data points. And so for this reason, mixed models can be really useful. So in this mixed model, what I'm doing is setting logit C equal to land use and depth. So once again, those are the predictors, land use and depth. But I'm setting up as random factors the effect of site and profile. Site because those are presumably, the soils gathered at those sites were gathered close to one another. And profile because the horizons within that profile, they all came from the same profile, so they definitely have a non-independence to them. So I run this model, and I get a somewhat different output. If you notice, we see a much kind of cleaner and clearer distinction between row crop and the other land uses. And we see a bit more control. So what we've removed are some of the idiosyncrasies of particular sites that were coming through strongly in the previous model. And so this is a much more accurate, broad predictor. There's ways you can even make a mixed model such as this even more detailed by bringing in coordinates. But I leave that for a later chapter. So if we bring in the once again, the confidence intervals, what we see in the mixed model is we see a bit less significant difference between land uses at various steps. We still have the row crop is quite significantly different from the other means. Oops. But we see a lot of overlap, or some overlap, between the swamp floodplain and the pine plantation. Notice that we saw much more discrimination between them in the linear model, but there we had a lot of pseudo replication, and what we're really seeing here is differences between sites rather than between the factors that we're really interested in. So that's a demonstration of the importance of mixed models and the kind of using mixed models, the kind of values you can generate. So what I want to show too is that using this mixed model, we could do it using the linear model, but we can actually generate ranges for soil carbon across these depths. Okay, so these are means, lower confidence intervals, upper confidence intervals, and so those are things that could be used to fill out a dynamic soil properties report. And so these are easily generated using the ls means package and this ls means command. And so one of the things that you will notice in this document is that I am constantly loading new packages to do specific jobs. But I'll have to tell you that I think the ls means package is really a terrific tool for trying to summarize patterns in data where you're breaking out different kinds of treatments, different kinds of land uses, etc. Okay, so if we take it a bit further, I just wanted to point out that at some point when you do those ranges, you may want to have the actual values for percent soil carbon. And so you would do the anti-logit and get these. And so we're talking pretty low carbon amounts in some of these soils, obviously. So now I want to take you through the process by which I assembled a lot of the soil data, and that is to use, some of you have probably been introduced to this, but to introduce you to the Soil DB database and all the data that happens to be there. And there's quite a lot of data that I haven't begun to really utilize. And so for any particular soil series, it's possible to download all the data that's available. In this case, I'm using RACA, which is the Rapid Carbon Assessment. There are other databases, as you're well aware, you can download data from. I wanted to show you the process that I assembled a lot of data to do the NIR work. And so basically for a whole suite of longleaf pine soil types, we had about 30 or 40 in the end. We downloaded all the RACA data and all the data from KSSL. And so the process is pretty simple, but you do need to be aware of the different subsets of the data. So there's site data associated with each sample. There's horizon data, and there is spectra. And so it's important to be able to pull those out and then combine them into a data set, which I show here. So this is basically the process of using the different join fields to create a data set that has both spectra, unique site data, and horizon data, for example. So putting that all together is what I'm taking you through here. in terms of in terms of acquiring data, something else that I want to take you through, because it's been a big part of our process, is actually bringing in GIS data. And so one GIS data would be the sorghum soils, and you can certainly do that to bring in map units. So I've noticed for most of the data here that I've downloaded through the RACA data using Fetch RACA in the SoilsDB database. It's not populated for map unit, but there's a process once you've created your Sergo and joined it to map unit data, you could extract map unit for any points. And it's important too to point out that all of these points will have lat-long coordinates, so you can use them to gather data. If you wanted to, you could use them to actually look at air photos and calc more specific kinds of land uses if you were interested, or you could calc more detailed vegetation. But I thought I would take you through the process of acquiring raster data, or acquiring rather GIS data, spatially explicit data, to join on to the existing data that you have. If you don't have, say, land cover data, the RACA data has land cover data. Some of it quite detailed, some of it quite broad. But you often, as I do, end up with data. I've ended up with a lot of data that does not have any kind of land use associated with it. Some of it, of course, is old, so we may never know what the land use was. But if we know when the data was acquired, we can download an NLCD, National Land Cover database, that is from a corresponding period. So I'm curious, and I don't know how to throw this question out there. How many of the participants regularly use R to do GIS? Sure. Sean, is there a way I can?
We've got some answers coming in, and they're just typing right now.
Okay.
No. Weird.
One says, yes, love R for GIS. Another one says, I do sometimes. ArcGIS, there's some others typing.
No, because we're an ArcGIS shop. Everything we do is set up for them. Even sometimes stuff that shouldn't be is put out that way, and so it's just easier.
So I've been in the last, so I learned GIS using ArcInfo and ERDOS products, and so I've been really switching to R lately. And I think a difference with R is that it's not organized, in the way that a unified software package is. But you can do almost anything, and often it's more stable and less computationally intensive. The other thing, of course, for the users of R that the truth is out there, but the code is out there if you're working in R. I mean, it's really astounding. Anything you can think of, you can usually find someone who has dealt with it and has posted code. So in that way, it's just a massive resource that just keeps getting bigger. So what I want to show you is just a real simple process for taking points that you would like to get land cover for and extracting that for your data set. You could do it from a variety of sources. If you have something more detailed than NLCD, so much the better. If your state or your county has some kind of land use raster, that might be better. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking all the data that I have and I'm turning it into a spatial data frame. And all I'm doing is, so I have coordinates, I have fields called X and Y. So I actually changed the coordinates, the fields that were called lat and long to X and Y. And then it's simple to use this command in R to establish that X and Y as the coordinates. What you must do, of course, in addition to the coordinates, is establish or calc the coordinate system, which in this case is unprojected. But of course, as with any GIS software, R needs to know that. Okay, so what I have are these points. These are just right now. These are just for the Pelham and Tifton. So I thought it might be useful just to show. Sometimes you get outlier points. There's mistakes in coordinates. So you almost always want to plot what you've got to make sure that something isn't off in Bermuda. So there's a lot of great simple mapping tools in R. There's some really sophisticated ones too. But I thought I'd just show you, okay, here's my points. Here's where they end up. They're in basically the coastal plain of Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama. Okay, the NLCD turns out, because it's a nationwide data set, it is not in it's not in an unprojected form. It's in Albers equal area. And so one of the things you're going to have to do in R, whereas possibly in ArcGIS this could be done on the fly without your even knowing about it, you'll need to reproject it. And so that's very simple. You just need to, I just copied this projection file from the NLCD database data set. Did I actually show you that I pulled that in? No, okay. Yeah, so I did pull in so I used the raster package and the raster command to pull in the NLCD database. And I show you where you can download that. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. But the NLCD database is in, if you just type NLCD, I brought it in as NLCD, you'll see a file that will tell you the projection of it. So I just copied that and used that to project the points I have to the same projection. Then to get the land use, land cover for the NLCD, from the NLCD into my data set, I just extract based on the points. So I've already made this into a spatial points data frame, and then I put it into the right projection. And so now I can extract the values from the NLCD raster. And so just to show you, I did that. So I did this extract command, then I pull them out, and then there I have that data. So now I can join that data. I can just do a cbind to bind that data back to my original data set. Of course, these are numeric codes, and you'll have to go and find what those codes are and join a table for that. And in the work I've been doing, I mean, there's a lot of effort into crosswalking different kinds of land use and deciding how you're going to split and join them. So that's something that you may or may not, you may just want to sit there and do that in Excel, and then record the logic of how you did that. Okay. So now I want to bring back. So the data that we have, this is something like the Julia Child phenomenon. I'm not going to take you through all the steps, but we did go and collect all this data, and we got coordinates for as much of it as possible. If land use was recorded, we used that land use. If we had no land use, then we used NLCD, or if we had a better choice, we extracted from that. And then we sat and thought about how to crosswalk these different names. Some people say pine plantation, and they say mixed pine hardwood. Another category was unmanaged pine. It was hard to know exactly what to do with some of those. Sometimes you could talk to the people who gave them that, and so anyway, you're familiar with that kind of problem. Now I want to bring in essentially all the data that we gathered from RACA and some other sources that had spectral data associated with it. And I'm gonna go through a very cartoon version of a spectral calibration. But I want to preface by saying one of the things that we really need to do is get a lot more soil data. So what I showed you initially, I showed you this table, and I'm sure you're all very familiar if you're trying to do DSBs, that you just don't have a well-populated data set. You probably have a lot for crops. Maybe you have a lot for pine plantations. But for a given soil, it may be really dominated by one specific type of land use. So what we really need is a whole lot more data, and a cheap way to get that, of course, is by scanning and then calibrating those scans to scans that also have accompanied chemometric data. And the more data you have, the better. But one of the things that I'm trying to do in this project is figure out ways of sharing data between soil types, and so that where things are under or overpopulated, we can still get better estimates across the board for individual soil types. So let me take you through the basic process, and I'm going to have a lot of notes and asides about how to do this. So we bring in the soil, and this is a very simplified table that I've created that has just the spectral data, the logit-C that we're interested in, and the profile IDs. And so one of the things that you'll do in doing a soil calibration is you're using non-parametric methods, machine learning methods, in which it's often that you cannot select models in the way that people traditionally do or have done in conventional statistics that you may be familiar with. And so one of the things we typically do is break the data set into training and test sets. But critically, you want to do that by profile, right? You don't want to break up profiles between training and test. That's going to magnify or inflate your predictive accuracy. Ideally, you also want to select spectra across a range of spectra so that you don't end up with a training set that has very different sample of spectra than the test set. And I haven't done that today for the good reason that it gets very complicated quickly. But the Kennard-Stone algorithm in the carrot package is an excellent way to do that. It allows you to break soil data up randomly, but also taking into account the widest range, providing a wide sample of the range of spectra in either training or test. So I'm sad to report that there was a really great feature of a R package called soil.spec that does wonderful graphs of spectra and allows you to see what spectra and transform spectra look like. And somehow it is off. It has not been updated, and I could not get it to produce the kind of lovely graphs I'm used to seeing from it. So I apologize for not being able to visualize the spectra better. But so one of the things we need to do first then is to get unique profiles, and that's all I'm doing here. I'm getting a unique ID by profile. And then I'm coming up with random numbers for the number of unique profiles. And then I use that essentially I merge all that back together, and then I subset the data into training and test sets. So what I'm doing is like a 60-40, and part of the rationale, I might in some cases do a 90-10 or a 75-25. In this case, we have very few spectra that actually have corresponding carbon values. So we have about 2,000 rows or samples, and we have about 300 spectra. So in situations where I have a very small set that I can calibrate to, in this case, 15% maybe, I often have a big training set because it's very hard. I'm sorry, I often make the split much broader, and the reason for that is that you may get a really small sample in your test set of the actual values, and so when you have a little to go with, sometimes you may need to go to as little as 50-50. So now we split the data, and then I'm going to use what the algorithm that's been most successful for me. There's a variety of algorithms, and it may really depend sometimes on the kinds of soils you're looking at. It may depend on the constituent that you're interested in. One of the things that I'm also interested in and could present at a later date, but is the idea of using neural nets where you can have multiple constituents, say pH, nitrogen, carbon, and other values, and relate them all at the same time to a set of spectra. But I thought I'd start with just a very simple approach. If anyone's used Unscrambler, Unscrambler largely relies on partial least squares regression. And partial least squares regression is a kind of regression that combines, it's basically a regression of the data after it's been had a principal components like analysis. So it's basically breaking the data into multivariate components and then using them to predict. One of the reasons we do this with soil spectra is that we're not really interested in causality or mechanisms. We're really just interested in a feature of, we're just interested in prediction. And so as far as that goes, some things I'm also not doing here, but that are often useful, is eliminating various areas of the spectra. And so often the 350 to 800 nanometers is something I drop. Often the spectra toward the end of the spectrum at 2500, it can often be very ragged. It can often be poorly sampled. There might be missing data there. That's also an area where you often want to remove those columns. Okay, so let's go through just a simple process. So basically, I've got a data set now that is nothing more than the carbon, the logit carbon value, and the spectra. And I've randomly split that into training and test data. And I'm using a package called PLS&R, which does partial least squares regression. And there's a lot of tuning that you have to do with these programs, with these machine learning programs. PLS&R is a bit more forgiving, and it's a bit simpler. So basically, I have the number of components set to 10, and that's because I set it to many more earlier, and in the tuning process, I saw that 10 was an optimum, and I can show you some of those tuning processes perhaps if we have time. But often you can look at the number of components, and you will see an increase in accuracy to a point, and then you'll start to see a dip. And so you can definitely see where you've overfit, and that's often overfitting is the peril of machine learning. And so often, the optimal, right now we're looking at training data, and so I've run this PLSR model on the Logit-C with this entire set of spectra. And I've used cross-validation, which is not quite the same as test, but it's actually a fairly rigorous test of the fit. And so what you can see is that this is the cross-validation error, and this is the overall error. And what you can see is that for, hello? What you can see is that the cross-validation error gives us a calibration in the high 70s. The overall, which is probably inflated, goes up a bit higher. If we ran it on test, we'd probably get something similar to this cross-validation error. And this is using R-square as the metric. There may be a value to using, in many cases, another kind of metric, such as RMSEP, that is mean squared error estimates. But what I'd like to show is that for a lot of the land uses, 70 might be a bit low, but to go back and tune this and take out some of the noise, what are called noisy spectra, so taking out some of those early and later spectra and some particularly noisy sections of spectra, and trying different kinds of transformations. And I forgot to mention that one of the things I did with the spectra, I broke out the spectra, and I did one of the commonest transformations, which is the Savitsky-Golay spectral transformation. And that basically tightens up it removes a lot of noise, okay? It increases your accuracy of prediction a lot. There are other transformations there, such as wavelet, that can also be really important. And depending on the algorithm you're using to do the actual calibration, some transformations, some prior transformations may work better than others. I found that wavelet transformations works really well with support vector machines. But if you're not interested in trying it all out, I think Savitsky-Golay with PLSR is actually probably your best bet in most cases. It's pretty predictable in yielding good results. And I think what I want to show you here is that with a certain amount of tuning, you could probably get your predictive accuracy up to 80%. Now, 80% accuracy in your prediction of soil carbon, if you're comparing land uses that are quite different, will be really useful additional data, particularly if you're able to collect a lot of it via spectra. And that's what I've shown in a paper I'm working on currently. So with that, I guess I want to leave some time for questions. I've shown you a lot of different things, and I'm not clear on what maybe people are most interested in hearing about. And one of the things I would throw out there is if I get comments about what you'd most likely to see further, I'd be happy to incorporate them into this PDF and repost it. So that is, I can add a lot of additional material. My sense coming into, I didn't have a good sense of my audience coming into this, so I'd really like to rectify that and maybe enlarge on this PDF, and maybe in a subsequent webinar that may take in more of the spectral and combining spectra back with other data to do the landscape scale prediction and elaboration of DSPs. So with that, I'll take questions, and I welcome as much feedback as possible, and very specific. If there's things that you'd like to see treated, there's things that you would like to code in R and don't know how to do, kinds of statistics that you think must be out there that would be useful for you within the context of what I've been presenting. Okay, so with that, I'll leave it open to questions.
All right, we've got a couple questions online, but I'll ask those in the room with me if they have any questions they'd like to ask first. Give people online a chance to compose their questions in the Q&A pod.
So I see one question that says, are the data sets used available along with the R code? And yes and yes. I may want to revise some things a bit for a day or two, but I'll certainly post them today and then update them if that's possible. I think that's possible.
Another question: the Savitsky-Golay filter. What are the numbers 1, 3, 11, and why do you use those?
Okay, so those are actually the defaults. So those are our parameters, and those are the default parameters used. And so that's what I adopted for this. There are kinds of soils and kinds of materials that you might want to use a different set. But typically in the soils, in soil transformations, people use those defaults. And I will say that I have yet to see, so in the various soil packages, a lot of times those arguments aren't even put in. If you do Savitsky-Golay, it just automatically puts them in.
I have another online comment. I would like to see how to process the spectra and building a library using R.
Okay, well that's really interesting. Okay, so that is a real, building the library, I think, is a really interesting process, and that's something I could speak to, although I think actually that's something I could definitely incorporate into a follow-up webinar that really focuses on calibration.
And we have a question here in the room.
So JP, what do you think your inference space or your area of applicability of these models would be? Do you think it's just the same suite of soils that you drew the initial sample from, or do you think you could extrapolate beyond that?
So I think that using the spectra and using a lot of the properties of the soils in Southeast, I think there's a real advantage to staying within some kind of natural boundary, be it sandy soils with certain kinds of properties. I think there are ways, though, that you could build models. So one of the things that I'm interested in doing is what are called geo-additive models. And so geo-additive models allow you to bring in actual latitude and longitude. And so if you brought those in, and then you also brought in, say, some of the gridded bioclimate variables that would give you an idea about rainfall and temperature patterns.
Yeah.
If you did that along with maybe some broad geology, then you might be able to really expand, say, the mixed model approaches I was showing. And so I think those could be really powerful. And those are some of the things I'm working on right now. And so those generally use a class of mixed models called GAMs, generalized additive mixed models. And so those allow for non-linearities. And I think they could be really powerful, particularly if you're wanting to combine data from multiple climates and areas. I think ordinarily, if you define a region of interest according to some general climate and soil features, you'll probably do much better in terms of inference.
That's an interesting approach. We've been thinking about coming at it in terms of soil orders and or climate, making sort of rule sheds for which to apply the models. But we find in the middle, particularly topography and pretty small amounts of topography variation can have a huge difference in carbon. And so it's made that different. But if we had an ancillary variable we could attach to capture that, maybe we could use it.
So, I mean, So I guess the scale of the national elevation data set is maybe not
Yeah.
good enough for you to capture
It
what you
typically
need in terms of.
isn't, but often we know enough about the soil we can attach some sort of proxy for that based on description or some other information.
So you have an attribute, because this was collected by a person, you have an attribute such as slope and
Yeah.
or aspect.
Yeah, typically.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, topography sure is going to be huge. I wasn't even including that. I mean, there it's really just how good, you know, can you extract accurate data, or do you have accurate data on
Right.
that? I wonder though, with LiDAR, this may be it's not, you know, it's not propagated all over the place yet, but
Right.
I know folks that work with LiDAR, and it's unreal the kind of topographic accuracy you have. So if there
Yeah.
were LiDAR data sets available and you had pretty accurate coordinates, you'd definitely be in business for topography.
Yeah, for sure. It's just a matter of patching together what you have where, but I'll let somebody else ask.
Okay.
Okay, we do have some others. Next one is, how many samples do you recommend we collect if we are interested in comparing regional soil samples to the RACA database? Your handout mentioned that we should exercise caution when using RACA carbon concentration and stock values.
So my handout said that?
That's what they
That's
claim.
interesting.
It says
Okay.
fetch RACA. There's a warning. It's probably in
Oh,
there.
I see. Oh, I see it. I didn't mute all the. So one of the things when I create that, you have to mute the R, what R comes back with. So I would say that and this is what I'm really struggling with right now, is we have a sample size for row crop and pine of various kinds that I think is really adequate to get at the range of, say, soil properties for most of the major soil series that we're looking at. I think what you're really asking is like, how much variability is there? And I think that's going to vary. And I think what you need to do is, and you could do this, this is actually an interesting approach that people have done, is trying to assess the variability in soil properties using spectra. So before you spend a lot of money analyzing samples, you could actually go out and collect a lot of samples, scan them, and then compare them to what RACA data there is, and get some idea, though, of the variability in the spectra across, within, and between land uses. And I think that would be a cheap way to then come up with a thoroughgoing sampling design.
So JP, if I can just step on you for a moment, that comment that comes back is something we put in with the RACA data because the initial push had only carbon estimates from VNIR scans, and since we are having problems with our models, they're not as accurate as we expected. So we're running more lab analysis and developing new models to try and improve them. So that's why that is in there. But
Okay.
the idea of using the scans for spatial variability, we actually are looking at that right now to see if at least it will help us
Excellent.
air propagation and things like that. But we
Right.
are still validating to make sure that the variability represented by the scans does represent the variability in air quotes reality.
Right. Now, is everyone hearing what you just said, or should I repeat it for the audience?
Oh, they heard that.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. I thought that was probably the case.
There is a comment online that refined EM is essential, LiDAR is being tested and shows promise, but is a challenge to handle in terms of data storage and analysis over large areas.
Well, that's certainly true. That's certainly true. And I think what is needed is really like LiDAR products that are like the NED or something where they're processed and made available in some kind of, slightly generalized and less memory-intensive form, and I think that's coming, but we're still way behind with that. Yeah, I think it's a tall order to take LiDAR. We have LiDAR for this county, and it's a tall order for me to take that and get it into a manageable form that, you know, I don't really need to the centimeter or millimeter, but I think sort of more generalized data sets that might be put together by, I don't know that it's happening, but by USGS, for example, would be a fabulous boon to a lot of the kinds of spatial data analysis that particularly people working on soils would like to do.
Well, JP, that's all the questions and comments I see online. I want to thank you for your time and effort to make this presentation today, and thanks to all the participants for joining in. We had more than 80 people join in today's webinar. The on-demand recording of this webinar will be available on our National Soil Survey Center YouTube channel within a couple of days, so please feel free to let your colleagues know about this training opportunity